I was in the studio last night as the first word of this story broke. It was from CBS Sports NFL insider Jonathan Jones, who broke the story in the form that many people are doing so today. It looks like the Cleveland Browns might have their new special teams coordinator. There's not been an official announcement by the team yet, but multiple reports are surfacing in, one from NFL Network, another one from other Cleveland sources, that the Browns will be hiring Bubba Ventrone as their new special teams coach. Now, this is a guy who was considered a top candidate over the last 48 hours when it was announced that the Browns and special teams coach Mike Prefer were parting ways. And now it looks like it'll be a return for a former Cleveland player. Ventrone was a former NFL safety who spent 4 seasons with the Browns from 2009 to 2012 as part of a good special teams core around that time for Cleveland. And he's been a pretty solid coach over the last couple of years. He was with the Patriots for a number of seasons, won back to back, won a pair of Super Bowls with them in Super Bowls 51 and 53, and then took over the Colts special teams roster starting in 2018. And this seems to be kind of a swift pick. It's an it's the offseason when we're really making a story out of who is going to be our special teams guy. But Ventura, I think, can be somebody who can bring some solid ground to a Browns special teams core that had their struggles last season, whether it came to some of the kicking woes with Cade York. You had some times where it looked like the coverage on special teams wasn't that great. And you're hoping that this can be another gap that can be plugged to ensure that the Browns will have more success this season against their opponents.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mitch, because I think when you look at the Browns this past season, they're as much as you can get on players for miscues. How many times did we hear defensive players talk about miscommunication errors? And that's why we had receivers running wide open in the secondary. Same can go for the special teams unit, right? I think if there was two things that were the ultimate detriment to the Browns last year, it was the defense and the special teams. And look no further than the week 2 game where you're up 30-17 in the New York Jets with under 2 minutes to play, and you can't recover an onside kick. Cade York misses an extra point, which ended up being really a big issue the rest of the season with his field goals being blocked, his extra points being missed. The Browns, I believe, Mitch, finished last year 18th overall in the NFL in special teams, which to me is actually a lot higher than I would have anticipated because they were anything but special last year. Look at the Super Bowl, for example. Kadarius Toney's punt return, as deep as he got that, set up the Chiefs ultimately with position to win a Super Bowl after scoring. The Browns needed some new life. I don't like this hire. I love this hire because Ventrone is here. He has familiarity here. He had a 9-year NFL career, which also means he has a vested option and pension and healthcare from the NFL, which is a big deal to players. He's been around the block. He learned under Bill Belichick. He played here in Cleveland, and he had one of the top special teams units in Indianapolis. But Mitch, I think the bigger thing here, they hire him as the special teams coordinator. Teams can block other teams requesting permission to interview candidates for the same position. Mm-hmm. The Browns also now announced that, or not the Browns, excuse me, reports also now announced that Bubba Ventrone is the assistant coach for the Browns, meaning the Colts could not block that because the Browns are technically promoting Bubba Ventrone. So this is a big move for the Browns. And obviously there's going to be speculation already. Is this guy going to replace Stefanski if the Browns get off to a bad start? Because I think everybody that is a Browns fan knows Kevin Stefanski's on a hot seat. We'll have to wait and see. I think this tells you a lot about Bubba Ventrone because I think he ultimately took this, Mitch, because he has aspirations to be an NFL head coach here eventually. He's only 40 years old. He's a very young coach. He is a hot commodity among other staffs and teams in the NFL. He's also a fiery personality. Mitch, how many times have we talked about guys not getting into players on the sideline? And now you take Joe Woods off and replace him with Jim Schwartz, who immediately comes into his press conference and tells you he holds players accountable because it did not look like last year players were held accountable defensively. And Bubba Ventrone does the same, but also is a fiery personality that, Mitch, when you're playing football, I think you have to have somebody on the sideline that's not a player that can get players hyped up, get in their face a little bit, and get them to buy into what's going on. I love this hire. And realistically, Mitch, I think this also opens the door because I think you and I may have been in the same boat here when we hired Jim Schwartz. Oh, maybe that's the guy that replaces Stefanski if things go south, because Schwartz has head coaching experience with the Lions. Now it almost looks like if things go south quickly for the Browns, which obviously we hope that is not the case because we want this team to win, it might be Bubba Ventrone who steps into the head coaching role, at least the interim tag for next season. But we'll have to wait and see. But Mitch, I personally love this hire. They got rid of their two biggest areas that hurt them last year in defense and special teams in terms of coaching. Now the players have to buy in, learn a new system. And I think this also tells you the Browns believe in the players they have. They necessarily didn't believe in the system and coaching staff in those respective rooms around the players. So to me, this says more the Browns think it was a coaching miscues last year than it was their players not being put or not being good enough to execute plays.
Yeah, and for most teams, it's easier to, I don't want to say cast off, but it's easier to put the reservations on the coaches in comparison to the players because you can get rid of them easier. You can get rid of a coach, you just say you're fired. Whereas with players, you have to deal with their salaries and their contracts, and you have to find ways to either coexist with them or break off the relationship so that you don't get left with a raw deal. With this, I mean, Ventrone was a former player. Obviously, we mentioned before he was for 4 seasons one of the top special teamers under the Browns cores that were under head coaches Eric Mangini and Pat Shurmur. He was a team captain in his final 2 seasons here and was a Pro Bowl alternate in 2010 for the #1 ranked special teams unit in the league under special teams coach Brad Seeley. And when you look at some of the teams he's been able to coach with, obviously winning those Super Bowls with the Bill Belichick and Tom Brady Patriots, and you have him taking over in Indianapolis, where it didn't seem like he was part of the major issues that the Colts seem to have over the last couple of seasons. This seems like a very safe bet for Cleveland, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is an instance where, I'm not saying that Jim Schwartz is going to have be a disappointing head or a defensive coordinator by any means, but I could see this being a case where people could look at it about a year or two from now and be like, "Oh yeah, that getting Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator was great." But how about Ventrone though? He really beefed up the special teams, and that could be something that can really be the determining factor if the Browns can make a push back to the postseason. If you can get into a situation where you have these close playoff games, I don't know. It seems like something that we can look at as, yeah, it's kind of just adding to the staff as well. But you did bring up the point of uh, if Stefanski were to get off to a bad start this year. I don't like that a lot of our conversations now, not just with you and I, but a lot of the Browns fandom in general is, well, if we hire this guy who's around like 40 or 50 years old, if you get this guy and this guy, he could take over if Stefanski bombs out. He can take over. I don't like that mindset. I don't like that sort of that way of thinking that some of the fans get seeped into their minds. And granted, they're just trying to be what I consider to be realists or preppers, but it just kind of feels like we're thinking too far ahead before we have any actions carried out.
And that's fair. I think that you and I both, though, can agree that this is a make or break season for Kevin Stefanski.
I agree.
And that's, I think, why we're talking about this, because Mitch, I think last year, obviously, I started the bus or the train by the end of the season. I think in week 3 or 4 of I was off Stefanski. And so I think it's just typical because I think a lot of Browns fans were frustrated. Also, does him being the assistant coach now, does that mean he's going to maybe help Stefanski when it comes to management of the game? Mitch, how many times last year did Kevin Stefanski's biggest fault become time management or decision making? Is Bubba Ventrone going to be somebody now that's in the headset with Kevin Stefanski and helping him make some decisions that ultimately cost the Browns a couple games last year? I mean, let's be honest with that. And so we'll see. I'm excited though, because I like the fact they're getting some new blood in here. I love the Jim Schwartz hire. I know I was the Brian Flores guy. I think Schwartz was definitely a great runner-up. I know Flores wanted to pursue head coaching opportunities, and he interviewed for Arizona, ultimately didn't get it. But I like the two guys they brought in because they're hard-nosed football guys that are going to hold players accountable. And I personally don't think that you're going to see a lot of turnover in terms of players for special teams, Mitch, because the Browns are going to get a player back this year that we did not see play in any game action last year. Now, He's coming off a significant injury, and that's Jakeem Grant. He was signed to a 3-year deal to be our kick and punt returner. And a lot of the times, Mitch, last year, obviously outside of the Houston Texans game in which Donovan Peoples-Jones returned that punt for a touchdown, the Browns were one of the worst teams in the NFL at returning punts and kicks for good field position. If Jakeem Grant comes back, and it's going to be hard because he is not at the beginning of his career, he's almost at the middle towards the end of his career, and an Achilles injury is a significant injury. But right away, Mitch, you might see a huge boost if Jakeem Grant is healthy as your full-time return man, a Pro Bowler, may I add, that was a return man. Now with Bubba Ventrone, I'm excited. I like where the Browns are at. I don't say that often. I really don't. Obviously, I think talking about last year after getting somebody with the talent and caliber at the quarterback position in Deshaun Watson, you couldn't really break that down because of all the off-field issues. But here we're talking about strictly football. And I hear you that you don't like this conversation, but I think it's something that's just natural because, it's only in Cleveland. We're the Browns. We're always prepared for the worst. But at the same time, I feel like this year we might be prepared for the worst, but it comes with reason. And that's why I actually feel confident now knowing that as we head into the season, they need to make some changes with player personnel. I think you and I can agree they need to get bigger on the defensive line. And we can break all that down probably later this month or in March once the combine happens and we see what happens with some other free agents. But I can't believe I'm going to say this. I feel good with where the Browns are at right now. I really do.